going to start in the atrium and just sort of walk through. And just, I want to know the difference between relationships and actual physical spacing. So there's a lot of what I would call white space around the garage door and around that circular media center. So I guess what I just want to know is that circle reflective of an actual circular space, or is that more that it really is grabbing the eye in terms of relationships right now?
Well, the white space around it we're figuring is classrooms.
Okay,
We just
okay,
didn't we
I
just
got you.
didn't put
Yep,
that.
that's perfect. That's what I want to know. So you're being accurate as you can with you like the idea of a circle, you like the idea that it's centered, there's classroom or administrative or public spaces around that. Okay, and so terrific. Tell me what the checkerboard kind of triangulated, the four triangulated things really represent for you all.
Excuse me. We kind of took your idea of having those, maybe some of those unused areas
Nooks
as,
and cranny
yeah, kind
spaces.
of
Okay.
whether it be couches or beanbag seating or anything like that, areas
Benches.
for reading, benches, that kind of thing.
Okay. Okay. And those, in our view, the horizontal single lines, those are bookshelves.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, great. And in the middle are going to be a variety of seats and spaces, but more formal workspace.
Yeah.
So those pinched
Desks,
triangle
chairs,
or
movable chairs,
okay,
that kind of thing.
great. And those sort of pinched, I'm going to say pinched because they're in the kind of spaces between the spaces. Those are messier, more personal, more ebb and flow, less formal spaces, soft seating, and that's
Yes.
okay. The atrium, and so you're playing around with that garage door option with the idea that the atrium and the literacy theater center can become one larger space if needed.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
I'm kind of thinking from my perspective, like we have what we call a circle room at my school,
Hmm.
and we have powwows and drum and dance and things in there and
Sure.
presentations. And I'm thinking how cool it would be to have an atrium where if that garage door came up and you could make that space larger and it could be a
Yep.
presentation area.
I agree. Here's what I'm thinking, and part of it's just because of the rectangular space that I see. And again, when we look at these sketches, my belief is always nothing's permanent, everything's adjustable. But know that I'm not trying to kick any of your ideas in the shins. It's like, well, what about this? I'm almost wondering, and I'm stealing this idea from someone. I'll tell you in a second. That where you have theater literacy centers or a horizontal rectangle for our view, if that were sort of a raised stage, and there's two ways of looking at that. It could actually be like a set of stairs that go up to a kind of a flat stage-like thing, but those stairs could actually be seating for people in the atrium. Does that make sense?
That's what
So
we
it's
were thinking of.
almost a public gathering space,
Yep.
but the stage is wide enough to serve as both a walking and walking over, and also literally a performance space. And if you have these large doors, and again, that's one way of doing it, and I brought that up earlier, so it has weaknesses and strengths. All of a sudden, that stage can go into the library and out of the library, or it can just have a back to the wall where the library is kind of closed off and quiet, but the atrium is more active and noisy and more public. Or you could reverse that so that the stage becomes into the library, and you could have doors going around it, as well as if the garage door is up, you can go up and over, almost the way a skateboard park would allow multiple ways. So there's something really interesting about the relationship between the atrium and the media center with that literacy or theatrical space as being sort of a stage that can be a stage to one, a stage to two, and then a shared stage, almost the way theater on the round allows the audience to be behind the stage and in front of the stage, depending on what's going on. And I'm actually stealing my visual interpretation, what you've drawn, from what Randy and Prakash have done, where they talk about this indoor-outdoor connection. And in our case, we're not literally talking about the outdoors, but we are talking about external relationship to the library and an internal relationship to the atrium, that could be essentially perceived as outdoor space and indoor space. That doesn't mean the elements, weather, storms can hit, but it does sort of say, well, the atrium really is this public open space, and you could use that threshold, if you would, like a threshold into a doorway, but it could be a stage, literally a staged threshold into the two. Now, obviously, there's 1,000 things that come to mind: accessibility, doors, whether or not that garage door is applicable, and really sound barrier when it needs to be. But it's an interesting idea because of relationships as opposed to material. So I'm intrigued by what you're doing there, and it essentially doubles the size of the library when it's appropriate for public gathering and public presentation. It doubles the size of the atrium, but it also shows a delineated relationship depending on how that theater is used. Now, here's something that I think is interesting, and of course, we're not talking about actual square footage, so I'm just imagining space. Imagine those two triangulated spaces between the atrium and the literacy center as now being sort of smaller seating spaces off to the left and right in our orientation. And so if the entire literacy center were closed, it could become a tiny presentation or black box space with seating higher up, looking down to the stage, as opposed to the library and atrium looking up to the stage. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Kind of like box
So,
seating.
and then if you actually made what you have is that checkered triangulated soft seating could actually be raised glass lofts. So essentially from the atrium in the library, you'd look up to these sort of tiny little conference rooms, maybe 6 people or 15 people, that would be raised above looking down into the library and down into the atrium. But that can also have a relationship with that stage if you wanted that to be that third, smaller arranged space. So that you could have a teacher with, say, 10 kids on one side, 10 on another, and it'd be completely filled, or 15 and 15, or 30 and 30, whatever it be. But all of a sudden, you could, and then each of those spaces could be their own little seminar rooms. With the center stage not really being active. But within the whole library center, or media center, and the whole atrium, they would essentially be a closed unit if those garage doors were dropped. So now we could even have 2 garage doors. So now the media center could expand if only one of the 2 garage doors were open, or the atrium could expand if one was open, but the library and atrium would still be separated. Now again, I don't know if 1% or 99% of any of that was part of what you're doing, but it's, again, once you put something into motion, that's what comes to mind, just by seeing space block as opposed to perfection. So what I like about your design is you've created relationships that weren't there originally. You've created void spaces and alternative spaces and related spaces I really like a lot. And so there's practical stuff about what's the transition, what's the material, do spaces have formal roles, informal roles, etc. Scheduling, is the atrium really a formalized space or not? Heights, and again, accessibility. If you have height, you've got to make sure somebody in a wheelchair can access, or an elder who's, not going to walk up downstairs very well. So, there's practical constraints and challenges. But you guys are doing exactly what we hope to do.